The morning mist hung thick over Cedar Ridge County as Sheriff Jake Morrison gripped his radio with white knuckles. 800 meters away, on the abandoned water tower overlooking Highway 92, a desperate man held 3 hostages at gunpoint. The SWAT team's precision rifles had failed shot after shot, each miss echoing through the valley like thunder. "Control, this is Morrison. We need backup now," Jake's voice cracked as he watched another round spark harmlessly against the steel structure. The hostage-taker, a local mechanic named Roy Bennett, who'd lost everything in the economic downturn, was growing increasingly agitated with each failed attempt. Before continuing, hit like and subscribe to discover more stories of unsung heroes whose valor shines brightest in life's darkest moments. Captain Sarah Chen, the SWAT commander, lowered her binoculars with frustration etched across her weathered face. "Sheriff, my best marksman can't make this shot. The wind's gusting at 15 knots, the angle's all wrong, and Bennett's using the hostages as shields. We need a miracle." Jake's mind raced through his limited options. The state police were 2 hours away, the FBI even further. 3 innocent lives hung in the balance, while Roy Bennett, driven mad by foreclosure notices and mounting debts, demanded answers that no one could provide. The irony wasn't lost on Jake. Roy had once fixed his patrol car's transmission, refusing payment because neighbors help neighbors. That's when Jake remembered his grandfather. Walter Morrison lived 15 miles outside town in a modest cabin that time seemed to have forgot. At 82, he moved with the careful deliberation of a man who'd learned to conserve energy for what truly mattered. Most folks knew him as the quiet old-timer who volunteered at the VFW pancake breakfasts and still hand-split his own firewood. What they didn't know was that Grandpa Walt held the unofficial record for the longest confirmed kill shot in Vietnam, 1,247 meters through jungle humidity that could choke a horse. "Chen, I need 10 minutes, Jake said, already moving toward his cruiser. "There's someone I need to call." "Sheriff, we don't have 10 minutes. Bennett's losing it up there." Jake was already dialing his grandfather's number, praying the old rotary phone in the cabin still worked. After 6 rings, a gravelly voice answered. "Walt Morrison speaking." "Grandpa, it's Jake. I need your help badly." A pause, then, "Where and when, son?" As Jake explained the situation, he could hear his grandfather moving around the cabin with purpose. Walt asked 3 questions: wind direction, distance, and whether Jake still kept the old Winchester Model 70 in the Sheriff's Department evidence locker, the same rifle Walt had used to qualify for sniper school in 1968. "That rifle shoots true at distance, Jake, always has. I'll be there in 20 minutes. "Grandpa, you haven't shot competitively in years. This isn't a deer hunt. There are lives at stake." Walter's voice carried the weight of decades and the quiet confidence of a man who'd faced impossible odds before. "Son, some things you never forget, and some shots are too important to miss." 23 minutes later, Walt's battered Ford pickup rumbled into the command post. He emerged slowly, wearing his faded marine dress blues from 6 decades past, the fabric still crisp despite its age. In his weathered hands, he carried a worn leather rifle case. Captain Chen stared in disbelief. "Sheriff, please tell me you're not seriously considering." "Ma'am," Walt interrupted politely, tipping his cap, "I understand your concern. But that boy up there is scared and desperate, and scared people make dangerous mistakes. Sometimes it takes one old fool to stop another from doing something they'll regret forever." As Walt assembled his rifle with the practiced efficiency of muscle memory, Jake noticed his grandfather's hands, steady as granite despite 8 decades of wear. The morning sun began to burn through the mist, and somewhere in the distance, Roy Bennett's voice carried on the wind, pleading for understanding in a world that had forgotten how to listen. Walt Morrison knelt beside the sheriff's cruiser, methodically checking his rifle's scope with the same reverence others reserved for prayer. The morning air carried the scent of pine and the distant sound of Roy Bennett's increasingly desperate pleas. Captain Chen paced nearby, her tactical radio crackling with updates from spotters positioned around the water tower. Target is approximately 800 meters northeast bearing, Chen reported, her skepticism barely concealed. Winds shifting between 12 and 18 knots, predominantly from the west. Mr. Morrison, with all due respect, modern SWAT snipers train for years to make shots like this under ideal conditions. Walt looked up from his scope adjustments, his blue eyes still sharp as winter sky. "Ma'am, I appreciate your concern, but in Da Nang, we didn't have ideal conditions. We had monsoon rain that could drown a fish, humidity thick as molasses, and Charlie taking potshots at us while we tried to work." He turned the adjustment knob with practiced precision, each click echoing years of hard-earned experience. "This Winchester and I have been through hell together. She's never let me down when it counted." Jake watched his grandfather work, remembering childhood stories that had seemed like tall tales. Walt had rarely spoken about Vietnam, but when he did, it was with the measured words of a man who understood the weight of taking a life, even to save others. "Grandpa, tell me you can make this shot." Walt stood slowly, testing the rifle's weight against his shoulder. "Jake, in 1969, I had a similar situation near Firebase Charlie. Viet Cong sniper had 3 of our boys pinned down in a rice paddy. Command said it was impossible, too far, too much cover. But sometimes impossible just means nobody else has tried hard enough." He pointed toward the water tower, where Roy Bennett's silhouette was barely visible against the morning sky. "That man up there isn't evil, son, he's broken. Lost his job at the auto plant, house went into foreclosure last month, wife left him for her cousin in Tennessee. Sometimes a man gets so cornered, he forgets which way is out." Captain Chen's radio crackled. "Command, Bennett's getting more agitated. He's moved the hostages closer to the edge. We need a solution now." Walt began walking toward the shooting position, his movements deliberate and calm. "In Vietnam, they called me steady because I was the best shot, but because I never took a life I didn't have to. Every trigger pull was a choice, every choice carried weight." He settled into position behind a concrete barrier, the rifle's bipod finding purchase on the rough surface. "The secret isn't in the shooting, it's in the understanding. You have to know your target, know yourself, and know when the moment is right." Jake knelt beside his grandfather, watching as Walt's breathing slowed to an almost meditative rhythm. "What if you miss? Then an old man learns he's older than he thought," Walt replied without taking his eye from the scope. "But Jake, I've been practicing this shot in my mind for 53 years. Every morning when I split kindling, every evening when I watch the sun set over those hills. A marksman never really retires, he just waits for the shot that matters most." Through the scope, Walt could see Roy Bennett clearly now. The man's face was streaked with tears, his rifle shaking in his hands. Behind him, 3 terrified faces: Martha Collins from the diner, young Tommy Patterson who delivered groceries, and Father Miguel from St. Mary's. All people Walt had known for years, all now depending on a shot that defied every tactical manual ever written. "Winds died down," Chen reported, her voice tight with tension. "If you're going to take this shot, it has to be now." Walt's finger found the trigger, and time seemed to suspend itself in that moment between heartbeats. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk circled lazily overhead, and the morning mist finally cleared to reveal the full scope of what lay ahead. "Roy Bennett," Walt whispered, his voice carrying across the valley with surprising clarity, "this is Walt Morrison. I knew your daddy and I know you. Let's talk about this, son." Roy Bennett froze at the sound of his name, carried on the morning air. His grip tightened on the rifle as he scanned the valley below, trying to locate the source of the familiar voice. The 3 hostages, Martha, Tommy, and Father Miguel, remained pressed against the water tower's railing, their faces pale with exhaustion and fear. "Who's down there?" Roy shouted, his voice cracking with strain. "I told you people to stay back." Walt kept his rifle steady, his voice projecting with the authority of a man who'd learned to command respect without raising his tone. "Roy, it's Walt Morrison, Jake's grandfather. I used to drink coffee with your daddy at Murphy's Diner every Sunday after church. Remember me?" Through his scope, Walt could see the confusion cross Roy's face. The younger man's weapon lowered slightly as childhood memories surfaced through his desperation. "Mr. Morrison, what are you doing out there?" "Same thing your daddy would do if he were still here," Walt called back. "Trying to help a good man who's lost his way." Captain Chen whispered urgently, "Morrison, what's your play here? You're giving up the element of surprise." Walt never moved from his shooting position, but his response was firm. "Ma'am, surprise only works if you're planning to kill someone. I'm planning to save 4 people, including the one holding the gun." Roy Bennett began pacing on the narrow platform, his agitation visible even at distance. "Mr. Morrison, they don't understand. They took everything, my job, my house, my family. What am I supposed to do?" "Roy, I know about the foreclosure. I know about Susan leaving. Hell, son, half the county's going through the same thing. But this isn't the answer, and deep down, you know it." Walt's voice carried the weight of lived experience. "You think I never lost everything? After Vietnam, I came home to find my first wife had cleaned out our bank account and run off with a traveling salesman. Couldn't hold a job for 2 years, too many nightmares, too much anger. Nearly ate my service pistol one Christmas morning." The admission hung in the air, raw and honest. Jake stared at his grandfather, realizing he'd never heard this part of the story. "But you know what stopped me, Roy? Same thing that's gonna stop you. The understanding that good people don't deserve to pay for our pain." Through the scope, Walt watched as Roy's shoulders began to shake with sobs. The hostages remained motionless, sensing the delicate balance of the moment. "I don't know how to come back from this, Mr. Morrison. I pointed a gun at innocent people. How does a man live with that?" "Same way a soldier lives with doing what war demanded," Walt replied. "You acknowledge the hurt you've caused, you make what amends you can, and you spend the rest of your life trying to be better than your worst moment." Father Miguel, finding courage in Walt's words, spoke softly to Roy. "Son, mercy isn't earned, it's given, but you have to be willing to receive it." Walt could see the internal struggle playing out on Roy's face. Years of training had taught him to recognize the moment when a target's resolve began to crack, but this was different. This was about redemption, not elimination. "Roy, I want you to think about your boy, little Danny. He's 8 years old now, goes to school with Jake's nephew. Smart kid, always asking questions about how engines work." Roy's rifle dropped to his side. "How do you know about Danny?" "Because I pay attention, son. That boy draws pictures of race cars and gives them to Martha at the diner. He's proud of his daddy, the mechanic. Don't let today be the day he stops being proud." The wind had stilled completely, and Walt's crosshairs rested precisely on Roy's center mass. But his finger remained light on the trigger, patient as the dawn. "Mr. Morrison," Roy called down, his voice breaking, "if I put this gun down, will you tell Danny that his daddy tried to do right in the end?" "Roy, you're going to tell him yourself. You're going to have years to show him what kind of man you really are. But first, you need to let those good people go home to their families." Through the scope, Walt watched as Roy Bennett slowly raised his hands, his rifle clattering to the platform floor. The hostages immediately moved away from him, their relief palpable even at distance. Captain Chen's tactical team began moving, but Walt remained in position, his weapons still trained upward, ready for any sudden movement. "Jake," Walt murmured, "sometimes the hardest shot is the one you don't take." As the SWAT team moved cautiously toward the water tower, Walt maintained his overwatch position, his rifle scope tracking every movement on the platform above. Roy Bennett sat with his hands clasped behind his head, while Martha Collins, Tommy Patterson, and Father Miguel slowly made their way toward the ladder that would carry them back to safety. "Overwatch, this is Alpha Team," Captain Chen's voice crackled over the radio. "We're at the base of the tower. Suspect appears compliant, but we need you to maintain coverage until we secure the area." Walt's response was calm and professional. "Copy, Alpha Team. I have clear sight lines on the suspect. Proceeding with caution advised. He's emotionally fragile." Jake watched his grandfather's unwavering focus, marveling at the transformation he'd witnessed. The gentle old man who taught him to fish and whittle had become something else entirely, a guardian whose steady presence commanded respect from seasoned tactical officers. Dr. Sarah Hendricks, the department's crisis negotiator, arrived as the hostages reached ground level. She immediately began assessing their condition while coordinating with the medical team that had been standing by. "Martha, how are you holding up?" Dr. Hendricks asked gently. Martha Collins, despite her ordeal, showed remarkable composure. "He never hurt us, doctor. Roy was scared, not violent. Kept apologizing, said he just wanted people to listen to him." She paused, glancing up at the tower. "That old man up there, he saved all our lives without firing a shot." Through his scope, Walt could see Roy Bennett's shoulders shaking as the weight of his actions settled in. The SWAT officers were halfway up the ladder now, their movements careful and deliberate. "Alpha leader to Overwatch," came Chen's voice. "We're about to make contact with the suspect. Any behavioral changes?" Walt studied Roy's posture, noting the subtle signs of resignation mixed with relief. "Negative, Alpha leader. Subject appears stable but defeated. Recommend gentle approach. He's carrying a lot of guilt right now." Father Miguel, now safely on the ground, looked toward Walt's position with something approaching reverence. "Sheriff Morrison, your grandfather just demonstrated something I preach about every Sunday but rarely see in practice: the power of redemption through understanding." Jake felt a swell of pride, mixed with newfound respect for the man who'd raised him after his parents' death. "Father, I'm just learning. There's a lot about my grandfather I never knew." "Sometimes the deepest waters run the quietest, son," the priest replied. On the platform, Captain Chen's team had successfully restrained Roy Bennett, their professionalism evident in their calm, respectful treatment of the broken man. Walt watched through his scope as Roy was carefully helped to his feet, noting the gentleness with which the officers handled someone who, moments before, had been their primary threat. "Overwatch, this is Alpha leader. Suspect is in custody. Scene is secure. You can stand down." Walt slowly lifted his head from the scope, his neck stiff from the prolonged shooting position. He carefully engaged the rifle's safety and began the methodical process of securing his weapon, his movements reflecting decades of ingrained discipline. "Jake," Walt said quietly as he closed his rifle case, "there's something you need to understand about today. That young man up there isn't evil, he's broken. The difference matters more than most people realize." Captain Chen approached as her team escorted Roy Bennett away. Her earlier skepticism had been replaced by professional respect. "Mr. Morrison, I owe you an apology. What you did up there, talking him down while maintaining Overwatch, that was masterful." Walt tipped his cap politely. "Captain, in 50 years of shooting, I've learned that the most important target is often the one you choose not to engage." Roy Bennett needed understanding, not elimination. As the emergency vehicles began departing, Walt noticed a small crowd had gathered at the perimeter. Word had spread through Cedar Ridge County about the standoff and its peaceful resolution. Among the faces, he recognized neighbors, fellow veterans, and members of his church congregation, all looking at him with a mixture of surprise and newfound appreciation. Tommy Patterson, the young grocery delivery boy, approached hesitantly. "Mr. Morrison, I just wanted to thank you. Roy wasn't himself up there, but you saw through to who he really is. That takes a special kind of wisdom." Walt's weathered hand found the boy's shoulder. "Son, everybody deserves the chance to be seen at their best, especially when they're showing you their worst. That's not wisdom, that's just being human." As the afternoon sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the valley, Walt Morrison packed up his equipment with the same quiet efficiency he brought to everything else. The legendary shot that had made him famous decades ago would remain unmatched, but today had demonstrated something far more valuable: the courage to not take the shot when compassion offered a better solution. 3 weeks after the water tower incident, Walt Morrison sat in his usual booth at Murphy's Diner, reading the Cedar Ridge County Gazette over his morning coffee. The headline read, "Local veteran prevents tragedy through courage and compassion." He folded the paper with a slight shake of his head. He'd never been comfortable with public attention. The bell above the diner door chimed, and Roy Bennett walked in, his eyes immediately finding Walt's booth. The younger man approached hesitantly, his hands fidgeting with a baseball cap bearing the logo of Patterson's Auto Repair. "Mr. Morrison, may I sit down?" Walt gestured to the opposite seat. "Course, Roy. How are you holding up?" Roy slid into the booth, his voice barely above a whisper. "The county prosecutor dropped the charges to reckless endangerment with community service. Father Miguel spoke on my behalf, said something about restorative justice, but I wanted to talk to you about something else." Martha Collins appeared with a fresh coffee cup, her smile warm as she filled it for Roy. "On the house, honey. We all know you're working hard to make things right." After she left, Roy continued, "Mr. Morrison, I've been thinking about what you said up there, about living with your worst moment and trying to be better. Patterson gave me a job, said the town needs good mechanics more than it needs perfect people." Walt studied the younger man's face, noting the exhaustion etched around his eyes, but also something new, a quiet determination that hadn't been there before. "Danny asked me something yesterday," Roy continued. "He wanted to know if I was still his hero. I didn't know what to tell him." Walt leaned forward slightly. "What did you say?" "I told him heroes aren't people who never fall down. They're people who get back up and try to help others do the same." Roy's eyes met Walt's. "I learned that from watching you." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Sheriff Jake Morrison and Captain Chen, both looking official despite the casual setting. Jake slid in next to his grandfather, while Chen took a chair from an adjacent table. "Walt, we need to talk," Jake began. "The state police want to offer you a consulting position with their tactical training program. They're calling what you did innovative crisis resolution." Walt's laugh was dry. "Jake, I'm 82 years old. The only thing I should be consulting on is the proper way to split firewood and when to plant tomatoes." Captain Chen leaned forward earnestly. "Mr. Morrison, what you demonstrated 3 weeks ago, the ability to maintain tactical readiness while pursuing diplomatic resolution, that's something we need to teach our officers. The psychological approach, the patience under pressure, the understanding that not every threat requires lethal force." "Ma'am, I didn't do anything special. I just remembered that the person on the other end of my scope was somebody's son, somebody's father. Training can't teach you that, experience has to." Roy Bennett spoke up quietly. "Mr. Morrison, if I may, what you did was show me that mercy isn't weakness, that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is choose not to use your strength." Walt's weathered hands wrapped around his coffee cup, the steam rising like morning mist over the valley. "Boys, I've been thinking a lot about legacy lately. In Vietnam, they measured us by confirmed kills and successful missions. But sitting here, looking at Roy working to rebuild his life, at Jake protecting this community, at all the good people in this town, I think maybe a man's true legacy isn't what he destroys, but what he helps preserve." Father Miguel entered the diner, spotting the group immediately. He approached with the purposeful stride of a man carrying good news. "Walt, I just got off the phone with the Veterans Administration. They want to interview you for their new conflict resolution program. Apparently, word of what happened here has reached some important people in Washington." Walt shook his head firmly. "Father, I appreciate the thought, but my traveling days are behind me. This town, these people, this is where I belong." Jake smiled, recognizing the stubborn streak that had defined his grandfather's entire life. "Grandpa, what if they came to you? Set up a program right here in Cedar Ridge. Train local officers, visiting departments, maybe even some military units," Chen added enthusiastically. "Use real scenarios, emphasize de-escalation techniques. We could save lives across the country." Walt considered this, his gaze drifting toward the window where the water tower stood silhouetted against the afternoon sky. Roy Bennett followed his gaze, both men understanding the weight of that moment when everything changed. All right, Walt said finally, but with one condition. Roy here becomes my teaching assistant. People need to hear from someone who's been on both sides of a crisis situation. Roy's eyes widened with surprise and something approaching hope. Mr. Morrison, I don't know if I'm qualified. Son, you're qualified by experience, which is the only qualification that